My name is Emily, and at 26, I'm a driven career woman. I share a home with my husband, David, and lately, I've been contemplating starting a family. The longing for a child has been growing stronger, a whisper in my heart that's getting harder to ignore. David, however, believes we should prioritize building a house and settling down before even considering children. So, we're diligently saving, funneling every spare penny towards the dream of our own home. While I understand his desire for stability, it's disheartening how easily he dismisses my feelings. Whenever I bring up the topic of children, it's like hitting a wall. "We need to build our house first, Emily," he'll say, his voice firm, leaving no room for discussion. I find myself resigning to the idea that I simply have to work harder, contribute more to our savings. Maybe then he'll finally listen. We've been married for a year now, and a pattern has emerged. My opinions rarely seem to factor into his decisions. This isn't new. It was the same when we were dating. Initially, I admired his strong convictions, his clear sense of direction. But marriage, I'm realizing, requires mutual respect, a willingness to consider each other's viewpoints. Lately, I can't shake the feeling that our foundation is cracking, especially with the added pressure from his parents. They live a short drive away, and David visits them frequently. He claims it's to cut down on expenses, but I've discovered he conveniently forgets to include his after-work drinks with coworkers in his frugal calculations. It's perplexing how stringent he is with me about saving, yet so lenient with himself. His frugality extends to the most trivial matters. "Conserve hot water, Emily." "Turn off the lights, Emily." These are directives he imposes solely on me. If only he held himself to the same standards, perhaps our relationship wouldn't feel so one-sided. It's infuriating, but he seems to genuinely believe it's acceptable to impose his ideas on others, especially me. Every week, when we visit his parents' house, it's the same story. "Hasn't it been a year since you got married? We want some good news soon," my mother-in-law exclaims, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "We want to see our grandchild," adds my father-in-law, the pressure mounting. I glance at David, sitting beside me, and catch his disapproving glare. It's clear he wants to silence me, to tell me not to say unnecessary things. While I share their desire for a child, it's David who's stubbornly refusing to even consider it until we have our own home. It's incredibly inappropriate for them to pressure me like this, especially when David completely ignores my pleas to discuss starting a family. Instead of advising their son, who holds the key to this decision, they persist in nagging me. I want to speak up, to defend myself, but their relentless pressure for a grandchild suffocates my voice. After the meal, David announces, "I'm going out for a smoke." My mother-in-law seizes the opportunity. "You know, Emily, it seems like you're working, but if you want to be a housewife, you should quit your job and work hard to be a good wife. Maybe that's why David isn't paying attention to you." It's a thinly veiled accusation, implying that I can't have children because I'm working. My blood boils. I have a strong desire for children. It's David who's refusing. "Just quit your job already," my father-in-law urges, oblivious to the irony. "It was David who asked me to work," I retort, my voice rising. "Why don't you talk to David first before constantly lecturing me?" Taking a deep breath, I continue. "When it comes to having children, I want them too, but it's David who stubbornly refuses to listen to me until we have our own home. Instead of nagging at me, why don't you tell your son the truth?" My words hang in the air, leaving my in-laws in a state of shock. I excuse myself with a simple apology and escape the suffocating atmosphere of their dining room. My anger extends to David, who stands leisurely smoking by the entrance. Without a word, I climb into the car. He follows suit, casually remarking, "Hey, are you leaving already?" Knowing he would never disclose the truth to his parents, I'm weary of their constant interference. "I won't be visiting your parents' house anymore," I declare. David's eyes widen in surprise. "Why not? We can save on food expenses, right? You also want a home soon, and children, don't you?" he questions, his voice laced with disbelief. Fed up with the continuous impositions from both him and his parents, I snap. "If it's about saving, I've told you many times that we would save more, if you stopped going to drinking parties or smoking, instead of driving to your parents' house just to save the cost of one meal? Why don't you save in that way? Everyone needs a break. Frustration spills over. You keep imposing things on me, like not using hot water and turning off the lights by 10 p.m. You think we can save money without sacrificing anything. If I have to go through all this trouble alone, then I don't need a home. I'm fed up with this. You never sacrifice anything yourself, but you're okay with imposing it on others. He tries to downplay the situation, saying it's not a big deal, but I counter, no, it is a big deal. How much patience do you think I've had all this time? I'm infuriated by his pretense in front of his parents, making it appear as if I were the reason we couldn't have grandchildren. I'm tired of being the only one asked to have grandchildren. It's not me who doesn't want children, it's David. I've been saying it for a long time. I want children soon, so please stop being so angry. Seeing David struggle to deal with my unusual outburst brings a slight sense of satisfaction, but it doesn't resolve anything. Unsure of what to do next, I gaze out of the car window, ignoring him. The drive home was tense, the silence thick with unspoken words and simmering resentment. A turning point came a month later, unexpectedly, with the passing of my uncle. He was my father's brother, a man who had lived a life of luxury, with several pieces of land and a sprawling mansion. His death, while sad, became an unexpected catalyst in my own life. Impressive, David remarked a few days later, upon receiving news about my potential inheritance. I didn't know you had such a remarkable relative. His tone was different, laced with a newfound respect, a hint of awe that I hadn't heard before. When the time came to discuss the details of the inheritance with the lawyer, I decided to do it at our apartment. It was a matter related solely to me, with no bearing on David, and honestly, he seemed uneasy about the whole concept of inheritance. I wanted to spare him any potential trouble, any sense of obligation or entanglement. David, I said gently, would you mind giving me some privacy for this meeting? It's just going to be a lot of legal jargon, and I don't want to bore you. He readily agreed, seeming almost relieved to be excused. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a kind, elderly gentleman with a patient demeanor. He carefully explained the intricacies of the inheritance, the assets, the liabilities, the potential tax implications. It was a whirlwind of information, and it took nearly 3 hours to cover everything. Finally, after thanking Mr. Henderson and seeing him out, I realized David was nowhere to be found. He must have stepped out while I was with the lawyer, I figured, not wanting to interrupt. I started preparing dinner, my mind still reeling from the complexities of the inheritance. 3 months passed. Life went on, seemingly unchanged. Then, one evening, David announced, "There's something I want to show you," a mischievous glint in his eyes. He wouldn't tell me what it was, just insisted I come with him. Intrigued, I agreed. Excitement bubbled up as we entered a new residential area, rows of pristine houses lining the streets. But my confusion grew as we parked in front of a particularly grand house. Before I could question him, David pressed the intercom. The door buzzed open, and my in-laws emerged, beaming. It was immediately clear that this wasn't their home. "You finally made it," my father-in-law boomed. "When are you and Emily moving over here?" "We're thinking of moving in by the end of this month," David announced, his voice filled with pride. Then, his tone shifted, and he turned to me, his face hardening. "Emily, you've been a selfish daughter-in-law, always shifting the responsibility for having children onto me." I shot him a disapproving glare. Why had he brought me here? I had clearly stated I wouldn't visit his parents anymore. "David," I demanded, "what is the meaning of this?" He shrugged, his voice dismissive. "Don't get so angry. If we live together, we can bridge the gap between you and my mom. Besides, this will be our new home from now on, so you should cooperate on the children issue as well." Live together? His words struck me like a thunderbolt. I hadn't agreed to anything of the sort, especially after explicitly stating that I wouldn't go to his parents' house anymore. And this house, something wasn't right. "David," I pressed, "this isn't your parents' house. What's going on?" "It's a two-family house," he explained, as if that solved everything. "My plan was always for us to live with my parents eventually, So what's the problem with living in a two-family house now? The problem? Where to even begin? Living in a two-family house with his parents was a significant issue, especially considering our financial situation. According to our calculations, building such a splendid new house was impossible. How had David managed this? My dad and I chipped in the money, he said casually. So our savings are empty, but it's fine, right? His nonchalant attitude perplexed me. I heard your uncle's inheritance was worth $690,000, so if you use that money to repay us for the cost of the two-family house, it should be fine, huh? I was speechless. The idea that he believed my inheritance should be used to fund this house without my consent baffled me. Even if I were to inherit the money, how I used it should be my decision, not his. Frustrated by my rejection of their proposal, David reached into his bag and pulled out a pre-filled divorce form with his name on it. Your money is our money, he declared. If you don't like living together, let's get a divorce. I took the divorce form from his hand, my voice steady. Fine. If living together is the alternative, then divorce is the better choice. I placed the form into my bag and turned my back on him and my stunned in-laws. By the way, I added, I renounced my uncle's inheritance. David froze, his face a mask of bewilderment. Without waiting for a response, I took a bus and headed back to our apartment. Back at the apartment, the silence was deafening. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a surprising sense of liberation. I filled in my name on the divorce form, the stark black ink a finality I hadn't anticipated. With a resolute heart, I submitted the divorce papers and headed to the home improvement store. I needed boxes, lots of boxes. It was time for a new beginning. Fortunately, it wasn't peak moving season, and I was able to hire a moving company without delay. As I packed, the reality of the situation sank in. I was leaving David, leaving the life we had built together, however flawed it was. A commotion outside the front door snapped me out of my reverie. David was back. I had the chain lock on, a precaution I felt was necessary. Sorry, I had the chain lock on, I said through the door. I don't know what you might do when you're so angry. I need to finish packing. Could you stay at your parents' house for a few days? I won't accept a divorce, he declared from the other side. But you handed me the divorce form, didn't you? I reminded him. If you sign the divorce papers, that means you agree to the divorce, you know. He frowned, frustration etched on his face. Why would you give up on a $690,000 inheritance? Normally you'd inherit it. It seemed he had overheard snippets of my conversation with the lawyer, but hadn't grasped the full story. Likely, after learning about the potential $690,000, he had rushed to his parents, and they, in their excitement, had impulsively purchased the two-family house without considering the consequences. The inheritance discussion came to me because there wasn't anyone else to inherit it, I explained patiently. My uncle had 3 sons, 2 daughters, a wife, and grandchildren. However, all of them renounced the inheritance, so it ended up coming to me. My uncle did have $690,000, but he also had to demolish his mansion, spend a lot on maintaining his land, and had accumulated a significant amount of debt. Renouncing the inheritance was the better choice. No way, David muttered, disbelief coloring his voice. So even if you had inherited $690,000, you're saying there wouldn't have been much money left. That's fraud. The lawyer and I had a proper discussion about it, I countered, but someone eavesdropped and left before hearing the whole story. My words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Perhaps finally, he realized he was in the wrong. It's too late now, I asserted. You betrayed my trust. We've already filed for divorce, and you and I are no longer a couple. Why are you subtly saying you don't want to divorce now? If you truly didn't want a divorce, you should have followed me right away when I returned, shouldn't you? I reminded him of the consequences of his actions, emphasizing that his mother's opinion about the divorce didn't change the fact that he and his father had invested in the two-family house based on false assumptions. Your mother's lack of experience with work doesn't allow her to fully appreciate the value of money, I sighed. realizing it wasn't my role to listen to his complaints about his parents. If we were still a married couple, I might have entertained the conversation, but that was no longer the case. "You haven't submitted the divorce papers yet, have you?" he pleaded. "If you do it now, we can still be a couple. Please, let's live together in that two-family house." "I've already submitted the divorce papers, David." "It's pointless now," I replied, my voice firm. His expression slumped, and he looked utterly bewildered, lost. While I believed he brought this upon himself, I couldn't let him linger outside forever. Briefly considering sending him away, I realized I had no time to waste. "I need to finish packing," I said, my voice softening slightly. "Please, just go." After a while, he was gone. I proceeded with the move, the task a welcome distraction from the turmoil within. The move to my new apartment was surprisingly cathartic. Unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, creating my own space. It felt like shedding old skin, embracing a fresh start. There was a lightness in my step, a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. I informed my workplace about the divorce, especially since my boss had acted as our mediator during our wedding. I felt a pang of guilt, a sense of obligation to apologize for the unexpected turn of events. My co-workers, who had celebrated with us at our wedding, were surprised and offered their condolences. During a lunch break, I was sharing the details of the divorce with a few colleagues when David burst into the department. "It's absurd that you're talking about the divorce," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. "I wish you hadn't mentioned it." He then proceeded to divulge his version of the story, painting me as the villain who had inherited a fortune and callously chosen divorce over living with his family. He conveniently omitted the part about his deception and the pressure to use my inheritance to pay for the house. The news spread like wildfire. David found himself ostracized, his colleagues avoiding him like the plague. I, on the other hand, received an outpouring of sympathy and support. The truth, it seemed, had a way of revealing itself. Eventually, David quit his job, unable to bear the weight of his colleagues' disapproval. In the aftermath, a male colleague, Mark, confessed his feelings for me. "I've actually liked you for a long time," he admitted, his voice sincere. "I hope to build a home where we can communicate as a couple and work things out together." His words were like a balm to my wounded heart. We started dating, taking things slow, building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Mark was everything David wasn't: considerate, communicative, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. Life began to take on a new rhythm. Work was fulfilling, my colleagues were supportive, and my evenings were filled with laughter and genuine connection with Mark. The pain of my divorce began to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and optimism for the future. One evening, while enjoying a quiet dinner with Mark, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Emily?" a woman's voice asked tentatively. "It's Sarah, David's mother." My heart sank. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I left the two-family house. "Hello, Sarah," I replied, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. "Emily," she began, her voice trembling. I need to apologize. David told us everything." Silence hung in the air. I couldn't believe my ears. David had finally confessed. He told us about the inheritance, about the house, about the divorce papers. Sarah continued, her voice choked with emotion. "We were so wrong, Emily. We pressured you, we interfered, we pushed David to do things he wasn't comfortable with. We are so sorry." Tears welled up in my eyes. This wasn't the angry, accusatory Sarah I remembered. This was a mother, heartbroken and remorseful, finally seeing the truth about her son's actions. "We lost our son," she sobbed. "He's lost his job, his wife, his friends. All because of us." I listened quietly, my heart aching for her pain. While I couldn't forgive David's actions, I understood Sarah's grief. She was a victim of her own misguided intentions, blinded by her desire for a grandchild and a picture-perfect family. "Sarah," I said gently, "I appreciate your apology. It means a lot. But what's done is done. David and I are divorced, and I've moved on." "I understand," she whispered. I wanted you to know that we regret what we did. We truly do. We spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation ending with a shared sense of sadness and regret. As I hung up the phone, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The past was finally behind me. I had a new life, a new love, and a future filled with possibilities. Life with Mark was a breath of fresh air. He was kind, patient, and truly listened when I spoke. We spent hours talking, sharing our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. He understood my desire for children, and we talked openly about starting a family someday when the time was right. One sunny afternoon, Mark took me to a beautiful park, a hidden gem nestled amidst the bustling city. As we strolled hand in hand, enjoying the tranquility of the surroundings, he stopped and turned to me, his eyes filled with love. "Emily," he began, his voice soft, "I know we haven't known each other for very long, but I feel like I've known you my whole life. You're everything I've ever wanted in a partner, kind, intelligent, strong, and beautiful." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat. "Emily, will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak. He slipped the ring on my finger, a perfect fit. We embraced, the world melting away as we sealed our promise with a kiss. Planning the wedding was a joyous whirlwind. We chose a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by our closest friends and family. My parents were overjoyed, their faces beaming with pride as they walked me down the aisle. Mark's family welcomed me with open arms, their warmth and acceptance a stark contrast to the coldness I had experienced with David's family. Our wedding day was everything I had ever dreamed of, a celebration of love, commitment, and new beginnings. As Mark and I exchanged vows, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had led me to this moment. The following years were filled with joy and laughter. We bought a cozy house, a place to call our own, filled with warmth and love. Our family grew, blessed with 2 beautiful children. Mark was an incredible father, patient and loving, always present in their lives. I continued to thrive in my career, finding a balance between work and family life. Mark was my biggest supporter, always encouraging me to pursue my passions. We were a team, navigating the ups and downs of life together, our bond growing stronger with each passing year. One day, while sorting through some old boxes, I stumbled upon the divorce papers from my marriage to David. A wave of memories washed over me, the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. But those feelings were distant now, like echoes from a past life. I thought about David, wondering where he was, what he was doing. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. He's lost his job, his wife, his friends, all because of us. A pang of sadness touched my heart. Despite everything, I wished him well. I realized that my journey, though painful at times, had led me to a place of true happiness. I had found love, built a family, and created a life filled with purpose and meaning. The scars of the past remained, but they were a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my ability to overcome adversity. As I tucked the divorce papers away, I felt a sense of closure. The past was finally where it belonged. In the past, I was ready to embrace the future, with Mark by my side and our children filling our lives with love and laughter. The journey had been long and winding, but it had led me home. Years spun by like the changing seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Our children blossomed, their laughter filling our home with a melody that warmed our hearts. Mark and I navigated parenthood with a shared sense of purpose, our bond deepening with every milestone reached, every hurdle overcome. One crisp autumn afternoon, while raking leaves in our backyard, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah, David's mother. I hadn't seen her since that phone call years ago. She stepped out of the car, her hair streaked with gray, her face etched with the passage of time, but her eyes held the same warmth and kindness I remembered. "Emily," she said, her voice a gentle whisper. "It's good to see you." We embraced, a silent understanding passing between us. The years had softened the edges of our shared past, leaving behind a quiet respect. "How have you been, Sarah?" I asked, leading her to the porch swing. "Oh, she replied with a weary smile. "Growing old. My bones ache a bit more these days." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the children playing in the yard. "They're beautiful, Emily. You've created a wonderful family." A bittersweet ache settled in her heart. "David never remarried," she confessed, her voice tinged with sadness. "He's still working, but he's lonely. He regrets what he did, He carries a lot of guilt." I nodded, understanding her unspoken plea. "He's welcome to visit the children sometime," I offered, surprising even myself. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, Emily, thank you. That would mean the world to him." A few weeks later, David came to visit. He looked older, his youthful arrogance replaced with a quiet humility. He spent the afternoon playing with the children, his laughter genuine, his eyes filled with a longing I recognized all too well. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, he turned to me. "Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry for everything. You deserve so much better than what I gave you." "It's okay, David," I replied, offering him a small smile. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "You've built a beautiful life, Emily. I'm truly happy for you." And in that moment, I knew he meant it. There was no resentment, no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance of the path not taken. As David drove away, I watched him disappear down the road, a sense of peace settling over me. The past had finally released its hold, leaving behind a quiet understanding. Life, like the river that flowed through our town, had carried us all forward, shaping and reshaping our destinies. We had each found our own way, navigating the currents of love, loss, and forgiveness. And in the end, we had all, in our own way, come home. Story 2. The morning of my father's burial was chilly and overcast. The weather was appropriate for the most important event of my life. As my stepsister Vanessa's comments from last night's wake replayed in my mind, I stood in front of the mirror, making the greatest adjustments to my plain black dress on a research assistant pay. "But at least you could pretend to dress decently, Sarah. Having you here is embarrassing enough." Dr. David Chen, my father, was a family disappointment despite being a great scientist. My stepmother claims that Isabella passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack in his tiny laboratory on the outskirts of the city, where he had spent many nights after being expelled from the family home 5 years prior. Isabella claimed that his fixation on unsuccessful experiments had become intolerable. The Chen family estate, a large house that had formerly been my boyhood home, was the location of the burial. As I passed past the elaborate gates, I suddenly felt as though I was in enemy territory. Memories came flooding back. In the kitchen, Dad is teaching me chemistry by experimenting with vinegar and baking soda. When I questioned him about his studies, his eyes brightened. "Look who made the decision to appear." Isabella's words interrupted my daydream. She was a vision in designer black, standing at the top of the marble stairs beside my stepsister, her immaculately manicured hand resting on the banister. Vanessa grinned, and the two of them appeared to be at a fashion show rather than a funeral. I said softly, "It's my father's funeral. I'm here, of course." "Yes, your dad." A chilly smile curved Isabella's lips. Dr. Chen was a brilliant man who put his valuable experiments ahead of his family's reputation. "Sarah, tell me, did he ever get anything useful out of that rusty lab of his? Or did he pass away as a failure?" Despite my hands clenching into fists, I maintained a steady voice. There was nothing wrong with my father. "Really?" Vanessa's diamond earrings caught the light as she spoke. "Did he live in that filthy little lab for that reason?" "As we uphold the family's social status. Face it, Sarah, he was an embarrassment. Just like you. The funeral service was torture." I sat in the back row watching as Isabella played the grieving widow, perfectly accepting condolences from Silicon Valley's elite with graceful nods and dainty dabs at dry eyes. The true irony was that half these people hadn't spoken to my father in years, not since Isabella had systematically cut him off from his social circles. And now the priests announce, Dr. Chen's widow would like to say a few words. Isabella glided to the podium, a picture of elegant grief. David was a dreamer. She began, her voice thick with fake emotion, perhaps too much of a dreamer. He chose to pursue his unique ideas rather than focus on our family business. But he was a good man in his way. I wanted to scream. This woman had no right to talk about my father. She hadn't seen him in the last 5 years, hadn't witnessed his dedication, his passion, his absolute certainty that he was on the verge of something revolutionary. After the service, as people began to disperse, Isabella cornered me by the refreshment table. Now, about your father's lab, she said, dropping all pretense of grief. I'll be sending people to clear it out tomorrow. Whatever junk left behind will be disposed of. You can't do that, I protested. That lab was his life's work. Actually, I can. The property belongs to Chen Industries, which, as CEO, I control completely. Your father was merely allowed to use it out of my generosity. She smiled, showing perfect white teeth. Unless, of course, you can afford to buy it. We both knew I couldn't. My salary as a research assistant barely covered my rent in a tiny apartment. I fought not. Isabella continued, Do not be concerned. I'll have them throw away his things with all the respect they deserve. She paused, examining her manicure. Oh, and Sarah, don't bother coming back to the mansion, now that your father is gone. There's really no reason for us to maintain any pretense of family ties. I left the funeral with tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead of going home, I drove straight to Dad's lab. The small industrial building looked shabby compared to the mansion, but to me it had always felt more like home than that cold, perfect house ever did using my key. The one thing Dad had insisted I always keep. I entered the lab, the familiar smell of metal and chemicals wrapped around me like a comfort blanket. Everything was exactly as he left it. Equations scrawled on whiteboards, computer screens displaying complex molecular structures, and his old leather notebook sitting on a main workbench. That notebook. Dad had carried it everywhere, constantly making notes, drawing diagrams, muttering about getting the sequence right. Isabella had always mocked it, calling it his book of failures. With trembling hands, I picked it up. The leather was worn soft from years of use. The pages dog-eared and coffee-stained. As I opened it, a letter fell out, addressed to me in my father's messy handwriting. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, something has occurred to me. I need you to know that all I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, it wasn't for nothing. The formulae in this notebook, they work. The molecular stabilization sequence is complete. But there are individuals who would murder for this technology, people who wouldn't grasp the need of utilizing it ethically. That's why I could never tell Isabella or go public until it was ready. My palms started trembling as I read further the unsuccessful efforts Isabella had scorned. They were preliminary experiments for a new carbon capture technique, a procedure that might physically suck greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and turn them into sustainable electricity. If this succeeded, it would be worth billions, maybe trillions, but more crucially, it might help preserve our deteriorating world. As I went through the notepad, my scientific expertise kicking in, I understood Dad had done it. He would answer issues that had baffled experts for decades, and the science and formulae were exquisite. This was not a failure's creation. This was brilliant. I was startled by a noise outside. When a vehicle drew up, light streamed over the windows. I was overcome with panic when I recalled Isabella's remarks. People were being sent by her to clean out the lab. They arrived early. I had to move quickly. On his desk, I noticed Dad's old laptop. It held his most crucial files, he had always informed me. I grabbed it in the notepad and scanned the lab quickly. What else would they ruin? Did I need to save anything else? Outside, the sound of voices prompted me to take action. I saw Dad's external hard disks in a drawer. Those two went inside my bag. Then I saw a little safe behind his desk. I had never seen one like it. The mix. What might Dad have used? More voices, now closer, jingling keys. With shaky fingertips, I made an attempt at my birthday. Nothing. The front door doorknob began to rotate. Mom's birthday? No. In a desperate moment, the door opened. When Dad showed me the periodic table for the first time, I tried it. Our unique day. He made the call. The safe opened with a click. Hi there. From the front room came the voice of a guy, Chin of the doctor. A tiny stack of documents that seemed to be patent applications and one USB disk with the labels Philosophy and Dad's handwriting were found inside the safe. I gathered everything, stuffed it all in my suitcase, and desperately searched for a way out, the rear entrance. During risky experiments, Dad always kept it unlocked for emergency exits. Just as flashlights shone in the darkness in the main lab area, I snuck away. Around the corner, I sprinted to my car. I spotted men in black coats hauling boxes and equipment inside the lab as I was leaving. Isabella wasn't only tidying up the laboratory, she was looking for it. She was aware that I used a false identity to check into a modest motel that evening, rather than going to my residence. I couldn't risk being discovered by Isabel's folks, not until I knew what I had specifically. I started going through Dad's files after setting up his laptop. I stayed up till dawn because of what I discovered. Do you want me to go on to the second half, where we see what Sarah learns and how she starts to combat her stepmother's empire? My hand is still trembling after what I found the next morning. 3 important phone calls are made by me. The first was to Dr. Marcus John, an old MIT colleague of my father's who had inexplicably retired the year Isabella evicted him from the house. The second was to my graduate school closest friend, Maya Patel, who was now the head of a prominent environmental law company. The third was to one of the most successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, my ex-boyfriend James Wilson. With a tone of astonishment in his voice, Sarah Chin James responded on the first ring. He put his profession above our relationship 2 years ago, and we hadn't talked since. I've heard about your dad. James, I'm very sorry. I need your assistance. Getting right to the point, I said. I need you to sign an NDA beforehand, though. I watched James's expression as he went over my father's statistics in a private conference room at his office an hour later. His face changed from one of doubt to one of shock to something that looked like Sarah. Here it is. He walked away, stroking his immaculately combed hair. Not only is this innovative, everything is altered by this. Just the carbon collection efficiency rates are 10 times higher than those of any other product available today. And the process of energy conversion, his eyes were big as he gazed up at me. Did your father really figure it out? Yes, I answered softly. There's more, though. I showed him the files that I had been deciphering all night. It wasn't simply the technologies Dad had created. He recorded each effort. Over the previous 5 years, Isabella and Chen Industries had stolen his research. Surveillance video, taped chats, and email threads. He retained everything. She attempted to compel him to give up the patents. I gave an explanation while displaying a particularly damaging series of emails. She began circulating allegations about his mental stability when he refused, stopped providing him with funds, and ultimately expelled him. However, she never gave up on obtaining his research. James. Whistle softly. Corporate espionage is what this is. This is serious business. He took a moment to examine me. What can I do for you? Capital for investments. Enough to launch a new business and accelerate its growth. Maya is already putting effort into getting the patents registered in my name. The initial paperwork had been filed by Dad prior to his passing. But before Isabel realizes what she's lost, we must act swiftly. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya before James could reply. Now 911 turns on CNBC. James turned on the conference rooms by grabbing the remote, TV mounted on the wall. Isabella stood at a podium in front of Chen Industries headquarters, her poised face filling the screen. I'm proud to share the news of Chen Industries' carbon capture technology breakthrough. Her voice was silky smooth as she spoke. The findings of my late husband's last project are outstanding, and we anticipate starting implementation this month. My blood froze. She was attempting to pass off her father's findings as her own. They were searching the lab for that reason. They're going to try to replicate his work, I muttered. James heard his phone ring. Even though Chen Industries' stock was already rising after the news, Isabella's press conference caught my attention and caused me to tilt forward. She misrepresented the chemical stabilization sequence that enables hitherto unheard-of carbon capture rates to the reporters. Totally incorrect. Dad's actual research was absent. They were bluffing with whatever incomplete notes they could find in the lab. "Dr. John?" My phone rang. "I witnessed the press conference," he stated without introducing himself. "She is in a difficult situation. Sarah. Chen Industries is in difficulty. They've been concealing up significant losses for years, employing innovative accounting to mask their failing initiatives. Your dad was aware. That's why Asbel was so eager to do his research. To keep the business solvent, she needs to win." I started to formulate a strategy. How soon can you assemble a team of researchers for David's daughter, Dr. Zhang? "Let me have 48 hours. The following 2 weeks passed quickly. Isabella, however, enjoyed the publicity. We operated covertly. James arranged for us to have a lab in an unidentified building outside the city. To evade investigation, Maya registered trademarks and patents under a number of fictitious businesses. A group of talented scientists who had all been fired from Chen Industries throughout the years were brought together by Dr. Zhang. However, we had an issue. Dad's research was with us, but we needed evidence that Isabella had made a concerted effort to take it. Dad's laptop didn't have enough proof. We required up-to-date records on their corporate espionage. At that point, Vanessa's greed comes in handy. I received an unexpected call from my stepsister. Her tone, Sarah, sweet and syrupy. "I've been reflecting on how terrible we've been to you, darling. Over lunch, I'll make it up to you." I accept it even though I know it's a trap. With its crystal chandeliers and rich wood, the restaurant she picked exuded old money. Vanessa had already arrived, dressed in clothing that most likely cost more than my annual wage. The way the funeral transpired makes me feel awful. She started pointing to the wine, and "I'd want to assist you. Aid me?" "Naturally. I am aware that you must be having financial difficulties right now, and, well," she leaned forward in a plot. "I am aware that you possess something. Your mother is requesting something from your father's laboratory." And there it was. "Mothers are willing to be quite generous if you assist us in reproducing your father's study. 7 figures. Generous." I sipped my wine. Purchasing time. "What if I say no?" A shark appeared in Vanessa's smile. "Don't be hard on me, Sarah. In one way or another, Mother always gets what she wants." She was unaware that I was recording everything she said. Maya and I got together that afternoon to go over the tape. "It's good, but we need more," she replied. "We want evidence that Isabella is aware of how quickly she made her declaration. With that, I might be able to help." It came from the doorway in a low voice. Isabella's personal assistant, Liza, was standing there anxiously as we turned around. "I've been employed by Mrs. Chan for a decade," she added. "I have seen and done things. However, that goes too far to claim Dr. Chen's study. I have emails, internal notes, papers, and meeting recordings in which she specifically mentions stealing his work." Maya's eyes glowed. "Are you prepared to testify?" Lisa gave a nod. "I was treated well by Dr. Chen. He was worthy of better. The pieces were coming together, but we needed to act quickly. Pre-orders for Chen Industries' non-existent carbon capture technology were already being accepted. Within a week, they had announced a demonstration for significant investors. We were about to set our trap. "Are you certain about this?" As we were ready for the last stage, James inquired. "There is no turning back once we take this action." I remembered my father working by himself in his laboratory, steadfast in his moral convictions despite the consequences. "Yes," I agreed. "Let's put a stop to this. Do you want me to go on to part 3, where Sarah confronts Isabella at the investor demonstration after carrying out her plan?" Clear skies greeted the day of Chen Industries' major showcase. The media was everywhere, and the corporation had booked out the most famous conference facility in San Francisco. The roadway was lined with news vans. As the most influential investors in the world came, reporters fought for space. From our own facility, where Dr. Zhang and our team were making last-minute tweaks to the actual carbon capture prototype, I watched the broadcast. For 2 weeks, we had been working non-stop to realize my father's vision, driven by coffee and a strong will to succeed. James remarked, straightening his tie as he had intended. "Everything's ready." He was a prospective investor who was at the demonstration. "The SEC agents are waiting, and Maya's squad is in place." I checked my phone and nodded. Lisa texted. "She feels anxious. Spent the entire morning rehearsing her speech. The technological intricacies are always evolving." Naturally, she felt anxious. Isabel was going to try to describe technology. Mrs. Chen wasn't really hers. The voice of a reporter entered the webcast. "Since revealing this innovation, the stock of your firm has increased by 300%. How would you respond to those who doubt the technology's viability?" Isabella's laugh was like glass shattering. "Hold off until the demonstration, in my opinion. The brilliance of my late spouse will speak for itself." Her cavalier exploitation of Dad's work made my fury boil, but I forced myself to remain composed. It all came down to time. At precisely 2:30 p.m., Isabella appeared on stage. Investors, members of the media, and members of the tech industry were crowded inside the conference hall. Vanessa sat smugly in the front row. Isabella started, "Ladies and gentlemen, in the battle against climate change, it is a historic day. Our world will be changed by Chen Industries' groundbreaking carbon capture technology." I had to respect her acting abilities as she threw herself into her presentation. She delivered the meticulously committed script, flawlessly, speaking with assurance about molecular bonds and energy conversion rates. But when the audience began to ask questions, I could see the fear in her eyes. "Could you elaborate on the stabilization procedure?" a scientist inquired. Isabella smiled briefly. "Naturally, specialized molecular sequencing is a part of the process. However, how can deterioration be avoided during the conversion stage? Our proprietary technology was pressed by another expert." Isabella was having trouble starting. James got to his feet at that point. A demonstration might be more persuasive. Isabella was clearly relieved. "Yes, without a doubt. The enormous machine behind her comes to life if you focus on the main chamber." It had a striking appearance. Even though I knew it was merely for show, I had to give them that pulsing lights and gleaming metal. Isabella went on. "As you can see, the air's carbon dioxide is being drawn out and transformed into the machine," made a terrible grinding noise before exploding. Alarms for emergencies started to sound. "Very minor technical issue," Isabella reassured the muttering audience. "Our engineers will." "Or perhaps," I exclaimed as I rose from my spot at the rear of the hallway, "you tried to recreate technology you don't understand and stole unfinished research, which is why the machine doesn't work." There was silence in the room. As I approached the stage, Isabella's face turned pale. "Sarah," she hissed, "why are you here?" "Isn't it obvious, Mother?" I continued, my voice carrying in the quiet room. "I'm here to demonstrate my father's actual technology." "Security," Vanessa shouted. But before anyone could move, the convention center's doors opened. Maya's throw it in, followed by a team of FBI agents and SEC officials. "Isabella Chin," she announced, "you're under investigation for corporate fraud, espionage, and securities manipulation." "This is absurd," Isabella sputtered. "I have proof." "Documents?" "Forged documents," Lisa remarked, coming forward. "I should know you made me produce them." The following hour was mayhem. While FBI officers secured Jin Industries' bogus prototype as evidence, Maya submitted our record of Isabella's scam, the emails, the recordings. Maya's team validated the transfer with Isabella's shares. I now owned what remained of Chen Industries, the corporation that had previously cast out. My father was now mine. The irony wasn't Asami. The next year brought developments I could never have envisaged. Chen Sustainable Technologies established our first large-scale carbon capture facility in California, with many more planned worldwide. The technique functioned better than even Dad had imagined, offering real hope in the fight against climate change. Vanessa signed a plea agreement and completed community service with an environmental cleaning group. The encounter appeared to transform her. She then created a charity focusing on sustainable clothes. My trusty head of staff was Liza, who had previously worked as Isabella's assistant. Her ability to stay organized is assisting us in managing our quick expansion. Isabella was incarcerated in a minimal security facility for 3 years. After being released, She relocated to a modest home in Montana, which was as far apart from her previous way of life as it could be. She occasionally writes me emails expressing sorrow and making an effort to explain things. I read them, but I don't always reply. I went to Dad's cemetery early on the first anniversary of his passing. The elaborate Chen family plot close by contrasted sharply with the plain headstone. "Dad, we succeeded." Placing fresh flowers at the stone, I replied quietly, "Your efforts are altering things and assisting others, as you've always desired." I attended a board meeting at our new headquarters that afternoon. With more than 1,000 workers, the company's market worth had risen to $50 billion. However, before entering the conference, I went to my office and opened my father's old notebook, which is now meticulously maintained in a glass case. Words he had penned years before appeared on the final page. "Success is determined by the constructive change we bring about, not by money or praise." Sarah, do you recall? Every day while I stood gazing over the city, I did recall. I considered legacy. Isabella was determined to keep up the impression of prosperity, therefore she had built her empire on deceit. Dad had been devoted to realizing his aspirations while working in a modest lab. Ultimately, honesty and commitment have triumphed against deception and manipulation. False promises had been defeated by actual change. Another overseas contract, this one from India, buzzed on my phone. Additional chances to use Dad's invention to cut carbon emissions, to change things. Touching the plain locket I usually wore, I grinned. The one with the little scrap of paper from Dad's notepad on it. Remaining loyal to your values and allowing your work to speak for itself can sometimes lead to more success than harming others. I learned that from my father, and that was the most significant gift he could have given me. I was contributing to the positive change in the world because of him. He would have been more proud of it than all the billions in the world, I knew. Story 3. As I fix my tie, I do one more check to make sure my presentation materials are flawless. My sister Rebecca's house hosted a family meal tonight that was more than simply a get-together. After years of laboring in quiet, I finally had the opportunity to show myself by using my firm, Griffin Capital, to make wise investments. I was prepared to present my largest project to date. All I needed was support from my brother-in-law, Marcus Williams, Executive Vice President of Monarch Bank. I didn't miss the irony. Marcus was the one who rejected my first company financing 10 years prior, referring to my concepts as infantile delusions. He now strutted around at all family gatherings, telling everyone how he had married my sister and saved her from her troubled family. James. Rebecca gave me a cheek kiss as she greeted me at the entrance. After marrying into the Williams banking dynasty, my younger sister had undergone a transformation. The one girl who used to stand up for me when I was being bullied in school was now more concerned with social climbing than with her family. "You look professional," she said, glancing at my off-the-rack clothing with hardly disguised dismay. "Marcus recently returned from Milan. Hold on till you see his new outfits, which are Italian." Attempting to seem ancient, the dining area was a testament to new money, antique furniture and chandeliers made of crystal. Additionally, I thought that the paintings were reproductions masquerading as originals. Marcus sat like a monarch presiding over the meal. James, the mastermind behind Tiny Company, joins us. The other guests, who were all bank executives and their spouses, all laughed as Marcus yelled out, "Are you still operating your small investment company?" What was its name? Capital of Pigeons. I discreetly put up my laptop and adjusted it to Griffin Capital. In fact, that's what I intended to talk about. I've got a suggestion. God, please, no more of your suggestions. Marcus grew significantly. Honey, do you recall his final thought? What was it? Projects of affordable housing. As like anyone would want to put money into that. Rebecca gave a tense giggle. Perhaps now is not the time, James. The plan is sound. I pushed for a development project worth $2 billion, community facilities, commercial areas, and sustainable housing. Monarch Bank loan is all we require. The wine almost suffocated Marcus. $2 billion. Are you insane? Others joined in on his laughter. That outfit is almost out of your price range. You also want to play with billions of dollars. The figures are accurate. I pulled up my presentation and urged, if you look closely enough, Marcus hit the table with a smash. Are you curious as to why you will never be successful? Because you have no idea how this world functions. Building communities and assisting people are not the goals of real business. It has to do with power. And you don't have any, my darling brother-in-law. He straightened his Italian suit and got to his feet. I will be discussing our most recent purchase with the board of Monarch Bank tomorrow morning. Big business is real business. You will never comprehend it. So, James, don't give up on your little aspirations. You're only excellent at it. The room was filled with fake laughter. It buzzed on my phone. My lawyer sent me a mail. Verified documents. The transfer is finished. You currently own 51% of the shares of Monarch Bank. Tomorrow's board meeting is set at 9 a.m. Are you prepared to greet your new hires? I gave Marcus a quick smile as I gazed up at him, still giggling at his joke. It would be fascinating to see what happens tomorrow. At 8:45 a.m., I showed up at Monarch Bank's headquarters dressed in the identical off-the-rack suit from the previous evening. When I stepped in, the security guy looked twice. He was accustomed to letting me go to Mr. Griffin instead of Marcus. Sarah Chen, my lawyer, was waiting at the elevators. Everything is set up. The board members are excited to hear Marcus's major news, which is why they come early. She grinned. They're not sure. The agenda has been somewhat modified. The past 10 years had been a cautious game of chess. My modest investments were noted by Marcus and his banking elite. Through Griffin Capital, shell corporations, covert alliances, and calculated purchases, I have been subtly constructing an empire that has culminated at this point. The financially troubled businesses I assisted in reviving had now developed a network of devoted supporters, and their pooled resources had enabled me to carry out the final takeover. Does anyone have any suspicions? As we traveled to the top level, I inquired. No. The purchase of shares was entirely segregated. Every shell corporation seemed autonomous. Marcus feels confident about today's meeting, according to our insiders. He intends to declare the acquisition of Riviera Banking Group by Monarch. I grinned. Another business that I covertly controlled was Riviera Banking Group. It was an outstanding boardroom, all marble and mahogany, with windows from floor to ceiling that look out over the city. At the head of the table was Marcus. His face was plastered with the same arrogant look from last night. What are you doing here, James? The board meeting is closed. Sarah really moved forward and set a folder down on the table. Mr. Griffin is quite entitled to be present. What is this? Marcus picked up the documents. As he read ownership documents, his face flushed. Calmly, I remarked, sitting down. Griffin Capital now owns 51% of Monarch Bank's stock as of this morning at 8 a.m. Chaos ensued in the room. Board members frantically whispered as they snatched copies of the documents. Marcus's face had turned white instead of rent. Not possible. If someone had been purchasing shares, we would have been aware of it. Would you? I opened a presentation on the screen in the boardroom, a network of businesses and purchases, all pointing in the direction of Griffin Capital. You missed small businesses coming together under one roof because you were too busy disparaging them. My banner. Marcus sputtered, "This is a trick." Until you started making risky investments and alienating smaller clients, the Williams family has controlled this bank for generations, I retorted. Did you believe those clients had no other options? Marcus, they came to me. You made fun of all those little dreams, and they added up. The members of the board were nodding. Seeing the whole picture now, Marcus had been spending a lot of money on his ambitious plans for growth. In the meantime, I've been establishing a strong network of devoted clients and wise investments. You can't do this, he whispered. Rebecca, she's your sister. Yes, she is. And maybe now she'll remember what that means. I stood up, straightening my off-the-rack suit. By the way, your Rivera Banking Group takeover announcement. That won't be necessary. They already answer to me. The boardroom doors opened and Rebecca burst in. Her face streaked with tears. Marcus, what's happening? Why is our account frozen? About that. I turned to my sister. We need to discuss some irregularities in Marcus's personal trading accounts. Significant irregularities. Marcus collapsed into his chair, his Italian suit suddenly looking like the costume he always was. All those years he breathed. You were playing us? No, Marcus, I was just doing business. Real business. Something you never understood. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of audits, meetings, and revelations. What started as a takeover quickly turned into a scandal. As our forensic accountants uncovered years of Marcus's financial misconduct, unauthorized trades, inflated assets, and personal expenses disguised as business costs. The prestigious Williams banking dynasty was built on a foundation of sand. I sat in my new office, formerly Marcus, reviewing the latest audit reports, and Rebecca stormed in. "How could you harm us like this?" she demanded, slamming her hands on my desk. "Do you know what people are saying? Our friends won't even take my calls." "Your friends?" I looked up at my sister, or your husband's friends. What's the difference? Marcus gave me everything. A perfect life, status, respect. Respect. I stood up, walking to the floor, to ceiling windows. "Let me show you something." I pulled up security footage from last month's board meeting. "Watch how your husband treated his employees, the ones who weren't significant enough." Rebecca's face plummeted as she saw Marcus berating a rookie analyst, ridiculing an elderly board member, ignoring reasonable concerns about predatory lending practices. "This was your ideal existence?" I inquired quietly, remaining silently as he bullied individuals. "Just like you stood silently during that meal when he humiliated me." I didn't know what else to do," she muttered. "After he helped pay for Mom's medical costs, I pay for those bills," I interrupted via one of my shell businesses. Marcus simply took the credit. "Check your records." Rebecca fell onto a chair, her fancy handbag dropping to the floor. "How come you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me?" The brother with little hopes. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Griffin, the FBI investigators are here concerning Mr. Williams's trading irregularities." Rebecca's head snapped up. "FBI, please, James, my spouse was taken by him. You are still my sister, too." I took a seat next to her. "I have thus made arrangements for immunity in return for his assistance. He won't go to jail, but he will be subject to fines and penalties. Even if the Williams family tradition may be ending, you won't have to witness your spouse in handcuffs." "Why?" With tears running down her cheeks, she inquired. "After what you done? Why provide mercy?" She was standing up to bullies who were making fun of her nerdy older brother when we were youngsters, so I showed her the framed picture I had on my desk. Because I learned to get honest from someone a long time ago. Power is not the same as strength. It all depends on how you utilize it. My phone chimed with a message from the board as Rebecca started weeping. Marcus had consented to step down. He would sign over his remaining shares as his final act. Officially, the Williams financial dynasty was finished. However, it is possible that the Griffin siblings might begin to recover after a year. Griffin and Partners Financial Group, a combination of Monarch Bank with my other businesses, was written on the building's sign. The mahogany and marble were still there, but the mood had shifted entirely. Regular meetings with small company owners and community leaders were held in the boardroom, and junior staff members no longer cringed when CEOs passed by. Marcus, an unexpected guest, was announced by my assistant while I was examining a micro-lending proposal. In his department shop outfit, he appeared more modest. His stance no longer exuded arrogance. He had avoided jail time because to the immunity agreement, but his banking career was over. The majority of his alleged pals had deserted him as soon as his empire fell apart. "James?" He stood clumsily near the entrance and nodded. "I arrived to sign the last document, the settlement of the divorce," Rebecca informed me. I said, motioning him to take a seat. "You're moving to Chicago?" she asked. "Very modest consultancy business." He tried to grin weakly. "Isn't that ironic?" I made fun of all those dreams. They weren't that little after all, it turns out. No, they weren't. On my desk, he put a folder. As part of the divorce settlement, the remaining shares in his Monarch Bank were transferred. He whispered softly, "You know what the worst part is? Retaining both the prestige and the money. It's acknowledging that I had the opportunity to participate in something significant. What do you think ethical banking should look like? Community growth. Instead of becoming your enemy, I might have been your buddy. You could have indeed." He acknowledged that Rebecca was happier today. When we meet with the attorneys, I observe it. She has regained her voice, founded that charity for kids. She talked about it all the time. You wasted time with the one you stated. He left. I'm worthy of that and much more. He straightened his plain tie and got to his feet. I apologize for what it's worth. For everything, not just the loans or the supper. James, you were the superior man. You were always. Following his departure, I observed my staff as I strolled through the office floors, our workers at their jobs. Our community engagement program was now led by the analyst Marcus had criticized. Our guiding principles have evolved from the concerns of the senior board members on ethical banking. The entire 10th level was devoted to Rebecca's charity, which supports impoverished children. With the help of social climbing and fancy brands, my sister was rediscovering her purpose. We occasionally rekindle our relationship over lunch at my office by laughing about the good old days. My assistant brought in a loan application for a small bakery downtown while I was getting ready for a board meeting. 10 years ago, according to the owner, she met you. I recognized the name and grinned. When I was having trouble building, the same woman gave me free coffee. Griffin Capital, who, when everyone else laughed, believed in my little aspirations. The tiny dream believer complimented me on the application I submitted. Destroying your adversaries isn't always the greatest form of retaliation. It's about doing something they never believed was feasible in order to disprove them. One thing Marcus had been correct about: power was a key component of business, but he never realized that the greatest power comes from helping people construct their own things rather than stealing from them.